The city of Seattle shimmered in silence, its skyline etched against the dark canvas of winter. The lights flickered like distant signals in the night, hinting at 1,000 lives moving in rhythm just beyond reach. Logan Whitaker stood alone, behind the towering glass windows of his executive office, the world sprawling beneath him like something he once longed to touch, but had long since forgotten how. It was late, nearing midnight, and the office building bearing his name was empty, save for the quiet hum of electronics and the soft thud of his leather shoes on marble. A glass of bourbon rested on the table beside him, half full and untouched, its surface mirroring the cold reflections of the city outside. He didn't drink much anymore, not out of health or habit, but because nothing ever tasted like anything anymore. At 38, Logan had achieved everything his younger self had once believed would complete him. Whitaker Dynamics had started with nothing but an algorithm and a sleepless night in a college dorm. Now, it dominated enterprise solutions across the West Coast, and his face occasionally graced business magazines, alongside headlines like The Silent Visionary or Tech's Last Gentleman. Success had never been a stranger to him, but peace, that had always remained elusive. He walked back to his desk and glanced at the unopened holiday gift basket from one of his corporate partners. Everything was perfectly arranged: gourmet chocolates, a bottle of imported wine, a handwritten card, signed by someone who probably didn't know his favorite color. He stared at it for a long moment, then moved it aside with a sigh. The emptiness didn't come from lack, it came from abundance. The kind of abundance that grows so vast, it swallows meaning whole. 3 relationships had come and gone in the past 6 years. They'd started with promise dinners that sparkled, conversations that danced, but they had all ended the same way. Each woman had fallen in love not with him, but with the idea of him, the executive, the jet-setter, the man who could make reservations at impossible restaurants and offer spontaneous getaways to Italy. But they had no idea who he was when the mask came off, when he was quiet, tired, or simply looking for a space to be human. He had once told someone, in the fragile trust of early affection, that he used to write poetry. She had laughed, not unkindly, but enough to make him stop. The sound of the elevator arriving startled him slightly, breaking the vacuum of silence. A moment later, Noah Caldwell appeared, shaking snow from his dark overcoat, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Logan didn't turn. He knew who it was, just by the rhythm of the footsteps. "You know," Noah said, stepping in without asking permission, "normal people go home this time of year." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Define normal." Noah chuckled and set a paper bag and 2 cups of coffee on the table. "You're impossible. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd be in the mood for company. Turns out, I was right." Logan gave a half smile and turned back to the skyline. "You always were good at guessing when I'm about to unravel. I'd say it's less about unraveling and more about drifting." Noah walked over and handed him a coffee. "It's Christmas next week. Logan, what exactly are you doing here? Working?" "No, you're hiding." Noah took a sip from his cup and dropped into one of the lounge chairs. "Tell me, when's the last time you felt something genuine? And I'm not talking about quarterly earnings." Logan didn't answer immediately. He sat, resting the coffee in his hands, as if to absorb its warmth without tasting it. Noah softened. "I know you, man, better than most. You didn't build all this to become a ghost behind glass." "I built this," Logan said finally, his voice low, "because I thought if I achieved enough, I could outrun everything I didn't want to face." Noah nodded slowly. "And did it work?" Logan looked down, his fingers tightening slightly around the cup. "It worked so well that now I don't feel anything at all." Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that only exists between old friends. Then Noah leaned forward, something playful but persistent in his voice. "So here's what we're going to do." Logan gave him a skeptical glance. "That tone never leads anywhere." "Good. You're going on a blind date." Logan nearly choked. "Excuse me." Noah grinned. "Hear me out. One dinner. No last names, no LinkedIn profiles, no corporate histories. Just 2 people talking." Logan shook his head. "That's ridiculous, is it? Or is it the exact thing you need? One evening to be someone other than Logan Whitaker, CEO, just Logan, the guy who once stayed up all night writing poems and believed love could change the world. That guy doesn't exist anymore." "He does," Noah said firmly. "He's just buried under 1,000 strategic decisions and silent nights." Logan looked away, the city lights flickering in his peripheral vision. "I've already set it up," Noah said, standing. "You'll get the details tomorrow. Trust me, she's not the type who'll care what company you run. She probably doesn't even know you're serious." "I'm always serious about things that matter." Noah headed to the elevator and paused before the doors closed. "One dinner, Logan. What do you have to lose?" As the doors shut behind him, Logan leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The hum of the city outside seemed to pulse, in time with something stirring faintly in his chest. What did he have to lose? He had lost so much already: faith in people, belief in intimacy, a sense of wonder. But maybe, just maybe, there was something still worth reclaiming. He picked up the coffee Noah brought, finally taking a sip. It was lukewarm, bitter, but strangely comforting. One dinner, it didn't promise salvation, but perhaps it could offer something else: a crack in the armor, a sliver of something real. Not the grand storybook romance, not some dramatic epiphany, just presence. For the first time in a long while, Logan allowed himself to feel curious, and that was enough for now. The snow had returned to Vancouver like a soft memory, blanketing the sidewalks in silence. From her office window on the second floor of the Jennings Literacy Center, Clara Jennings watched it fall slow and steady, each flake catching the golden glow of the lamplight outside. It was nearly 10:30 p.m., but she hadn't moved from her desk in hours. Stacks of reading assessments and lesson plans surrounded her like a paper fortress. A paper chain of hand-colored holiday decorations looped lazily across the window frame behind her, made by her students earlier that week, their laughter still lingering in the air if she closed her eyes long enough. Clara rubbed her temples gently and glanced at the small framed photo on her desk. It showed her, barely 25, holding a book in one hand and a child in the other, both smiling with uncontainable joy. The child in the picture, Leo, had long since grown up and moved on, but he was one of her first students, and the reason she'd stayed. For the past 7 years, the Literacy Center had been more than just a place of work. Kit was her home, her heartbeat, founded in memory of her late father. The center served children and adults from low-income communities who had slipped through the cracks of the educational system. Clara had poured every ounce of herself into its growth, her love woven into its walls, its bookshelves, its chipped desks. She had made a quiet vow a long time ago to give others the voice she once struggled to find herself. Some nights, though, like this one, the weight of that promise felt heavier than others. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Tessa pushed it open without waiting for permission, holding 2 mismatched mugs of chamomile tea and a familiar glint of mischief in her eyes. Her scarf was dusted with snow, and her cheeks were flushed from the walk across the street. "Still working?" she asked, setting the mugs down. "Clara, the holiday party's over. Even the overachiever volunteers have gone home." Clara smiled warily. "I just wanted to finish the prep for next week's book fair. The donations arrived today, and I need to sort them by reading level." Tessa folded her arms and gave her a knowing look. "Clara Jennings, if I didn't love you, I'd stage an intervention." "I'm fine," Clara replied, reaching for her mug. "I like the quiet. Besides, the kids deserve everything." "They do," Tessa said, pulling up a chair across from her. "But so do you." Clara paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Tessa said slowly, "that you've built something incredible here. You've created a sanctuary for people who didn't have one. But you've also forgotten to carve out even one corner of joy for yourself." Clara looked away, her voice soft. "This place makes me happy." Tessa didn't argue. She knew better than to push too hard. Instead, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a red envelope. "Then think of this as a thank you gift. One night, one dinner, with someone I think you might actually enjoy meeting." Clara blinked. "Tessa, no, not this again." "Yes," Tessa said, sliding the envelope across the desk. "It's already arranged. He doesn't know your last name. He's not from here. He's just someone who could use a night outside his own head." Clara raised an eyebrow. "And you're a matchmaker now?" "Only when I see 2 people who might be exactly what the other forgot they needed." Clara didn't open the envelope. She traced its edge absently with one finger. "I'm not ready for whatever that is." "It's not forever," Tessa replied gently. "It's not a vow. It's just dinner. No pressure, no assumptions." Clara hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the hallway outside. The building was quiet now. The echo of little footsteps, laughter, reading voices. They were gone for the night, but they would return tomorrow. They always did. And she would be here, like she always was. Tessa stood. You've spent your whole life giving. Maybe it's time to receive something unexpected. Clara stared at the envelope long after her friend left. She remembered once, years ago, when she was still grieving her father's death, a teacher had said to her, "There are people who bring light wherever they go, but they often forget they need the light too." That night, she took the envelope home and left it untouched on her kitchen counter. But in the quiet hours before dawn, as snow whispered against the windows and the city slept, she opened it. A name, a time, a restaurant near Stanley Park. Christmas Eve. She wasn't sure why, but her heart skipped, not with excitement, not quite fear, but with the faintest flicker of wonder. Clara never believed in fate. She believed in work, in quiet miracles made possible by routine and compassion. But maybe, just maybe, there were some moments that couldn't be scheduled. Some turns in the story she hadn't written herself. She folded the paper, placed it back inside the envelope, and set it by her coat. One dinner, no expectations, only possibility. And for the first time in a very long while, she let herself feel the weight and the hope of that word. The snow that evening fell in deliberate silence, cloaking Vancouver in an elegance only winter could bring. The sidewalks glistened under amber streetlights, and the bare trees in Stanley Park bowed under soft white weight. Nestled at the edge of Lost Lagoon, just beyond the park's winding trails, sat a quiet restaurant glowing with golden warmth. From the outside, it looked like something out of an old novella, place where stories might begin with candlelight and end with memory. Clara stood just inside the entrance, brushing snow from her coat and steadying her breath. Her green knit dress clung gently to her frame, simple and warm, and her scarf carried the faint scent of jasmine and library books. She had arrived early, as she always did. Punctuality was, to her, a form of respect toward time, toward others, and perhaps, most of all, toward the version of herself that needed order to feel safe. The host led her to a table near the window, where the view looked out onto the glistening trees and frozen water beyond. The restaurant was small, intimate, with only a handful of tables occupied. Conversations murmured softly beneath low jazz playing in the background. Clara folded her hands in her lap and tried not to fidget. She wasn't nervous, exactly, but it had been years since she had allowed herself even the suggestion of a date, especially one arranged. Without her oversight, she glanced at the clock, then the door. Part of her half hoped he wouldn't show. She could go home, slip into her fleece pajamas, read one of the new children's books that arrived yesterday, and tell herself she had tried. But then the door opened, and the air shifted. Logan stepped inside, brushing snow from his sleeves. He wore a dark wool coat over a charcoal suit, and his posture held a quiet precision. There was something distant in his gaze and alertness, perhaps, but it softened when he spotted her. For the briefest moment, surprise flickered in his expression, as if something about her presence defied his expectations. He approached slowly. "Clara?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, almost hesitant. She rose to her feet. "Logan." They shook hands formally, gently, and sat across from one another. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't awkward, more like they were both trying to locate something unnamed in the other. The waiter arrived, poured water, offered menus. They murmured thank yous, then returned to silence. Clara smiled first. "This place is lovely." Logan nodded. "I've never been here before." "Me neither," she said, and her voice carried a light warmth that surprised even herself. They spoke then, cautiously at first, about the snow, the holidays, the oddness of blind dates. Logan admitted he wasn't in the habit of attending them. Clara confessed she usually found excuses to decline. They both laughed, and the tension cracked just enough to let something human through. "What do you do?" Logan asked, then quickly added, "Sorry, I know we're supposed to avoid that question." Clara tilted her head thoughtfully. "I don't mind. I run a literacy center for underserved youth." His eyes lingered on her. "You teach kids to read, not just kids. Adults, too. New immigrants, teenagers who dropped out, even seniors who never had the chance before." She paused. "But yes, reading is where it starts." Something in her voice shifted as she spoke, became firmer, brighter, like a fire catching light. Logan leaned in slightly. "You seem passionate about it." She smiled, almost shyly. "Books saved me, more than once. I guess this is my way of returning the favor." He didn't respond right away. He looked at her the way people look at unfamiliar constellations. How long something so bright had existed without their knowing. And you, she asked, what do you do besides blind dates? He hesitated for half a breath. Software development, he said, choosing the simplest version of the truth. Clara didn't press. She nodded, her expression open, UNDEMANDING, that the waiter returned with their meals. Candlelight flickered on their plates, on the glint of Clara's locket, on the edge of Logan's glass. Outside, snow fell steadily, veiling the lagoon in white stillness. They ate, talked, listened. Clara shared stories of her students, funny ones, heartbreaking ones. She told him about a boy named Matteo, who learned to read by sounding out comic books, and a woman named Farah, who brought tears to everyone's eyes when she read her first poem aloud at 60-3. Logan listened as if hearing a new language. For the first time, one where care wasn't transactional, and impact wasn't measured in metrics. I've spent years around ambition, he said eventually, but I don't think I've ever met someone so committed to service. Why choose something so hard? Clara looked down at her hands. Because it matters. Because when I watch someone hold a book for the first time and see their eyes widen, I remember that not everything valuable can be counted. Some things are only felt. Her words settled between them like a hushed dot, and then it was Logan's turn. He spoke slowly, cautiously, as if unsure how much to reveal. He told her he built systems to solve problems, that his days were mostly numbers and strategy, and that lately, it felt like he was watching his life from the outside. He didn't mention his company by name. He didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the brand, but the emptiness that often followed his success. I used to love what I did, he said, staring into his glass. But somewhere along the way, the work started to define me instead of the other way around. Clara didn't offer advice. She simply listened, and perhaps that, more than anything, made him speak without fear. By the time they finished their meals, the room had thinned. Only 2 other tables remained. The jazz had softened into a gentle piano arrangement. Outside, snow had blanketed everything in white. Logan looked toward the window, then back at her. Would you like to walk a bit? It's late, I know, but the snow's beautiful. Clara hesitated, then smiled. I think I'd like that. He helped her into her coat, and they stepped into the night. The air was crisp, cold, but not cruel. Their footsteps crunched against fresh snow as they strolled alongside the lagoon. Lanterns cast amber halos along the path, and in the distance, the city lights twinkled across the bay like secrets waiting to be told. For a while, they didn't speak. They just walked side by side, not touching, not rushing. Do you come here often? He asked. Sometimes, she replied. When I need quiet, when the noise of everything becomes too loud. He glanced sideways. I wouldn't have guessed. You needed that. You seemed grounded. She chuckled. That's the easy part to show. But we all carry something. A wound, a memory, a hope we don't quite know how to name. Logan nodded slowly. I think I forgot how to hope. They stopped by a bench overlooking the frozen water. Clara turned to him. Then maybe this is where you remember. He didn't kiss her. The moment wasn't asking for that. Instead, he let her words wrap around him like the snow, soft, steady, impossible to ignore. And for the first time in a very long while, Logan Whitaker didn't feel alone. He felt seen, not as a CEO, not as a success story, but as a man who had forgotten the sound of his own heartbeat and was now quietly listening for it again. They stood in silence as the snow continued to fall. Strangers no longer, but something not yet named. The morning after their walk in Stanley Park, Clara woke with a stillness in her chest that felt almost foreign. It wasn't silence, she knew that well, but something gentler, something like calm, the kind of quiet that arrives not because the world has gone still, but because, for a moment, the weight she always carried had shifted slightly off her shoulders. She made coffee slowly, watching the snow swirl outside her kitchen window. There were still forms to fill out, volunteers to coordinate, and a shipment of books to sort at the center. But for once, she didn't rush. She sat with her coffee, breathed it in, and let herself remember how Logan had looked at her the night before, not with agenda or charm, but with something closer to reverence, and how, when she spoke, he had listened as if every word she offered might matter. By midday, she was back at the Jennings Literacy Center. The place had already begun to fill with its familiar rhythms, children's voices echoing in the stairwell. the thud of boots on tile, the crackle of an old space heater in the reading room. She stepped into the main hallway and exhaled. Home. In the office she found a note on her desk. "Thanks again for last night. I'm glad I went. Logan." No flowers. No overdone gestures. Just a note, handwritten, folded once. She stared at it longer than she meant to, tracing the tilt of his letters. Then she smiled and tucked it inside her desk drawer, as if some small, private part of her wanted to keep it safe. She didn't expect to hear from him again so soon. But 3 days later, her phone buzzed during a break between tutoring sessions. "Logan Whitaker, would you be terribly offended if I asked you to coffee this Saturday? Something lost ticks. I promise not to talk about software." She laughed quietly and texted back, "Lostix coffee sounds acceptable. No algorithms allowed." When they met again, this time at a small cafe tucked behind a used bookstore in Kitsilano, their conversation unfolded more easily. The first date had been about curiosity. The second felt like discovery. Logan asked questions that weren't just polite, they were attentive, and Clara, who usually preferred to listen more than speak, found herself revealing small things. How her father used to read to her on rainy nights. How she loved jazz but couldn't play an instrument. How sometimes the pressure of being the strong one left her more tired than she admitted. Logan didn't flinch from any of it. In fact, he seemed to carry her words carefully, as if he knew they weren't offered lightly. Over the next several weeks, they met in small ways that didn't disrupt Clara's world, but slowly folded themselves into it. Sometimes it was coffee on Wednesday mornings before her classes started. Other times, a shared walk along the seawall after Logan finished a meeting downtown. He never pushed for more, never asked questions that pressed too hard. And because of that, she gave more of herself than she expected, layer by layer, without fear. Then one afternoon, while helping to sort donations for the center's winter book drive, Clara mentioned offhandedly that they were short on volunteers for the weekend. "I could help," Logan said. Clara turned, surprised. "You?" He shrugged. "I've got 2 hands. I know how to carry boxes. I'm qualified." She laughed. "You'd be bored out of your mind." "You don't know that," he said, and his voice held the same even tone he used when negotiating deals. "Try me." And so, that Saturday, Logan showed up at the Jennings Literacy Center in jeans and a flannel shirt. A far cry from the polished exterior Clara had first met. He arrived early, rolled up his sleeves, and immediately began organizing stacks of books with 2 teenagers who eyed him warily at first. By the time Clara emerged from the office 20 minutes later, he was crouched on the floor, listening, as a little boy explained which superhero was the fastest, and why reading about him made the words go faster. She watched from the doorway, something unfamiliar blooming quietly in her chest. Logan wasn't performing. He wasn't managing. He was present. Later that afternoon, she handed him a clipboard. "I wasn't sure if you'd last more than an hour." He smiled. "Neither was I, but it turns out I'm good at stacking and listening." She nodded. "The 2 most important skills around here." Over the next few weeks, he returned again and again. He helped fix a broken shelf in the reading room. He sat cross-legged on the carpet during story hour. He donated laptops to the adult literacy program, but made sure to deliver them anonymously. Clara never asked him to do more. He simply showed up. And the children noticed. So did the staff. Tessa cornered Clara one day in the supply room. "Okay, I was rooting for him from the beginning," she whispered. "But even I didn't expect him to be this decent." Clara didn't reply at first. She was still trying to name the quiet wonder growing inside her. Still, doubt wasn't something she surrendered easily. She had seen good intentions crumble. She had watched people get close, then pull away once the weight of real responsibility settled in. So when Logan suggested helping plan the center's holiday open house, she hesitated. "It's chaotic," she warned. "There's glitter. There's children hyped on sugar. You might not survive." "I'm willing to risk it," he replied. That evening, after everyone had left, she found him alone in the main reading room, adjusting the strings of holiday lights someone had hung crookedly. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said gently. He turned to her, a quiet sincerity in his eyes. "I know, but I want to." The way he said it made her breath catch. She had been waiting for the catch, for the moment when the polished exterior cracked to reveal something else, ambition, expectation, ego, but it hadn't come. And maybe that, more than anything, unsettled her. That night, as she walked home under a sky dusted with stars, she Thought about what it meant to be seen, not just in your best moments, but in your ordinary ones. What it meant to be accepted when you weren't trying to impress. What it meant to be loved not because you were exceptional, but because you were real. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone buzzed. Logan Whitaker, today made me feel like a different version of myself. Not someone new, just someone more whole. Thank you. She stared at the message for a long time. Then, with fingers trembling ever so slightly, she replied, "That version suits you." And then, just as she set the phone down, she whispered into the quiet, "It suits me, too." The first time Clara suspected that Logan Whitaker might not be who he seemed was a quiet Thursday afternoon in late December. The day had started like any other, children laughing in the hallway, the smell of cinnamon and worn paper wafting through the literacy center, and the ever-present clatter of activity that defined their chaotic, beloved routine. Logan was in the corner of the main room, repairing the base of a sagging bookshelf with an intensity that made the children whisper in admiration. He was covered in sawdust, sleeves rolled up, and a boy named Jeremy had declared him the coolest uncle in the world. Clara had smiled, watching from a distance. Something in her chest had softened every time she saw Logan blend into her world without resistance, without expectation. She had long stopped counting his visits. He came because he wanted to, not because she asked him to. He was just there. That evening, after everyone had left and the echo of children's voices had faded into memory, Clara stayed behind to organize the New Year's reading list. She was flipping through a folder of donation leads when her eyes caught on a magazine left behind on the front desk. At first, it seemed ordinary, a December issue of a tech publication, folded casually beside a stack of coloring pages. But when she picked it up, the front cover stopped her cold. Logan Whitaker, the disruptor behind Whitaker, Dynamic Seattle's quiet powerhouse. Her heart stuttered. The man in the photo was him, elegant, sharp-suited, confident, in a way that felt foreign to the Logan who had just minutes ago crouched on the floor beside a wobbly shelf, letting 6-year-olds stick star stickers to his sweater. The article boasted numbers and innovation, global impact, AI breakthroughs. She skimmed it, stunned by the magnitude of what she was reading. A private, multi-billion-dollar empire, partnerships with global firms, board appointments, awards. He hadn't just omitted his title, he had omitted an entire world. She sat with the magazine on her lap, her hands numb and her mind racing. The quiet man who volunteered at her center was one of the most powerful technology executives in North America, and she had no idea. She didn't sleep that night. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that his presence, his kindness, his willingness to serve, that was what counted. But the part of her that had been betrayed before, the part that had been made to feel small and foolish for trusting too easily, stirred uneasily inside her. By morning, she decided she needed answers. He arrived just before noon, as promised, to help set up for the upcoming winter open house. He wore jeans and a thick navy sweater, a toolbox in one hand and a coffee in the other. When he saw her waiting by the front steps, his smile broke easily across his face, but it faltered when he saw the magazine in her hands. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even ask a question right away. She simply held it out to him. "I found this on the desk yesterday," she said softly. He took it slowly, glanced at the cover, and let out a quiet breath. "I see. I had to read it 3 times before I believed it," she said. "I kept thinking there must be another Logan Whitaker. But it's you, isn't it?" He nodded. "It's me." She folded her arms, more to hold herself together than anything else. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked down at the cover, then back at her. "Because I didn't want to be that version of myself with you. That version of yourself is your life. It's a part of my life," he said gently. "But not the part I wanted you to meet first." Her chest tightened. "You let me talk about struggling to find funding, to buy books, to keep the lights on, all while knowing you could have written a check and solved half our problems without blinking." "That's exactly why I didn't," he said, voice calm but steady. "I didn't want to walk into this place as someone who fixes problems with money. I didn't want to change the dynamic before I even knew what it meant to be here. I wanted to earn your trust, not buy it." Clara swallowed, her throat thick. "But don't you think I had the right to know who you were? I never lied to you. You just didn't tell the truth." There was a pause between them, the kind that pressed hard against the ribs. "I've spent years in rooms where everyone wanted something from me," Logan said. "And for once, I met someone who didn't. Someone who looked me in the eye and saw a man, not a brand. I was afraid that if I told you, I'd lose that." Clara looked away, toward the steps where just yesterday Logan had sat with Lonnie and taught her how to sound out words with the rhythm of a poem. The same man who swept floors and read stories and picked out books based on themes of resilience and hope. The same man who had never once spoken about himself unless asked. "I didn't fall for the man in this magazine," she whispered. "I fell for the one who helped a little boy write his name for the first time." He stepped closer, slowly, as if not wanting to shatter the space between them. "I'm not asking you to ignore what I've kept from you," he said. "I'm just asking you to remember who I was before you knew." She turned to face him fully. His eyes were steady, not defensive, but open in a way that spoke of years of silence, of decisions made out of fear, not arrogance. "I believe in transparency, Logan. It's how I run my center. It's how I protect myself." "I understand," he said, "and I know I might have lost some of your trust. But I'm here not as a CEO, not as a solution, just as me." She stood in silence, watching him, and then something inside her eased, because in all the moments they'd shared, in all the days he'd shown up, not once had he offered advice she didn't ask for, or waved his resources like a flag. He had listened, he had carried boxes, he had laughed with children, eaten burnt cookies, and fixed wobbly tables without complaint. He had done what most people in power forgot how to do. He had stayed. After a long breath, she said, "If you ever decide to be part of something bigger than your empire, Logan, this is what it looks like." He nodded. "I already decided. The moment I met you." She looked away quickly, the emotion rising too fast. "Just ... don't disappear. Don't become someone who only shows up when it's convenient." "I won't," he said. "You have my word." And for the first time since discovering the truth, she allowed herself to believe it. Later that afternoon, as they unpacked decorations for the center's open house, Logan placed the magazine on a high shelf, out of reach, out of view, not to hide it, but to let it rest. Because here, in this space of colored paper stars and mismatched chairs and voices still learning how to shape meaning from syllables, the man on that cover didn't matter. Only the one who remained did. The week leading up to Christmas brought with it a stillness that seemed to settle over the city, like a hush before something sacred. Vancouver's streets glittered with festive lights, but for Clara, the days blurred together in a quiet rhythm of giving. She spent her mornings organizing book bundles, her afternoons fielding last-minute calls from volunteers, and her evenings writing thank-you notes to those who had donated or simply shown up when it mattered. It was the kind of work that left her bones tired and her heart full. Logan, true to his word, kept showing up not as a guest, not as a benefactor, but as a steady presence. He fixed the rattling heater in the staff lounge, delivered cocoa packets for the children's craft day, and helped Clara hang handmade snowflakes from the ceiling beams. Every time she looked at him, she saw less of the mystery and more of the man. A man who didn't need to be in control to be meaningful. A man who gave without narration. What she didn't know, however, was that Logan had been watching her more closely than she realized. He noticed how her face lit up when a child read a sentence without stumbling, how she gently adjusted the tinsel garlands so they didn't overshadow the student artwork on the walls, how she always took the broken scissors instead of asking for a better pair. He also noticed the fatigue, how she touched her temples when she thought no one was looking, how she stayed behind after everyone left, her fingers curled around a chipped mug of tea, and her shoulders slumped with quiet resolve. And it was that combination, her unwavering care and her unspoken weariness, that moved him to action. He wanted to give her something she wouldn't expect, not something that dazzled, something that healed. On December 24th, Clara left the center in the late afternoon to attend a small charity luncheon across town. She was running on little sleep and barely enough food, but she went because she always did. Commitment, to her, was not seasonal. When she returned that evening, the sky had darkened into navy blue, the stars just beginning to emerge behind scattered clouds. She walked toward the building, weary but content, expecting a quiet night of reorganizing the library corner before Christmas Day. But as she approached, something felt different. The windows of the Jennings Literacy Center, usually dim by this hour, glowed with a soft golden radiance. A gentle hum of music spilled into the street. She stopped, then opened the door, and froze. The main hall had been transformed. The usual rows of worn tables had been covered with forest green cloths dusted in glitter. Twinkling lights lined every edge of the ceiling, strung between hanging lanterns that swayed gently like they held wishes instead of light. A towering Christmas tree stood in the far corner, decorated with paper ornaments made from recycled book pages, each bearing a child's name and a line from their favorite story. The air smelled of cinnamon, pine, and cocoa, but more than that, it smelled like memory. Dozens of gift-wrapped books sat beneath the tree, carefully labeled, many with handwritten notes tied to them in ribbon. Clara took one hesitant step forward, then another. Suddenly, from behind a stack of presents, Lonnie rushed toward her, arms flailing in excitement. Miss Clara, look what Uncle Logan did. He made it all magic." The children followed, laughing, cheering, grabbing her hands and dragging her deeper into the room, their voices overlapping in a joyous, chaotic symphony. "He brought the big tree. He read us a story and made cookies. He made the snowman in the hallway." Clara's eyes swept across the room, her heart expanding with every detail. At the far end, just near the reading nook, Logan stood. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, his hair tousled, his expression tender and almost nervous. In his hands, he held a small box wrapped in paper that shimmered under the lights. When she reached him, she didn't say anything at first. Her throat was too full. He handed her the box, his voice soft. "I wanted you to have something that wasn't about function, just something ... to carry forward." She opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate silver locket, shaped like an open book. Inside the cover, etched in tiny script, were the words, "Hope and Light. Always where stories begin." Next to it lay a folded note. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "Clara, you taught me what it means to show up not with answers, but with presence. You reminded me that purpose doesn't always come from impact. Sometimes it comes from intimacy, from being exactly where someone needs you, without needing to be everything. I came here not knowing what I was missing. Now I know it was this place, these children, you. I don't want to just support what you're building, I want to build it with you. If you'll let me, I want to stand beside you. Not in front, not behind, just beside. Because when I see you in this space doing what you were born to do, I see the kind of life I didn't know I could want. A life that is full, rooted, true. Will you let me be part of that story?" She looked up. Logan wasn't smiling like someone who expected a yes. He was simply waiting honestly. vulnerably. Clara didn't answer with words. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him with a gentleness that said everything she couldn't yet speak. He held her just as tightly, neither of them moving, the lights casting soft halos around them, as if even the room understood the gravity of the moment. The children, perhaps sensing something sacred, had fallen quieter. But when Lonnie clapped her hands and shouted, "They're hugging. That means it's love," the whole room erupted in applause and laughter. Clara pulled back, laughing through tears. "You planned all this." "I had help," Logan said, glancing toward Tessa, who grinned from across the room. Clearly in on the surprise. Clara looked around again, taking it all in, the lights, the books, the joyand, then back at the man who had walked into her world without expectation and filled it with light. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." That night, as the celebration continued, with dancing and caroling and warm drinks served in mismatched mugs, Logan didn't try to impress anyone. He handed out cookies. He read a story aloud to a circle of children, pausing dramatically for every ho ho ho. He wiped spilled cider without complaint and helped a boy with his shoelaces. Clara watched him from the side of the room, a quiet awe growing inside her, because love, she was beginning to understand, didn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it came quietly, like snowfall, soft, certain, steady. Later, after the children had gone home and the volunteers had begun to clean up, Logan found her alone near the Christmas tree, holding the locket in her hand. He sat beside her, on the old reading bench, and didn't say anything at first. Finally, she turned to him. "You've given me something I didn't know how to ask for." He looked at her. "What's that?" "A partner." He took her hand and held it in both of his, warm and solid. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She believed him. Outside, the stars had come closer than they had all season. Or maybe it only felt that way because, for once, she wasn't looking. Up alone, the days after Christmas passed in a slow, golden hush, as if time itself had softened to let people breathe. Vancouver remained cloaked in snow, the streets dusted in silver, and the skies wide with winter light. At the Jennings Literacy Center, warmth lingered long after the final ornaments had been packed away. Children still burst through the doors, with cold cheeks and bright voices, but something in the air had shifted, grown richer, fuller. Clara moved through the center with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. There were still forms to file and programs to plan, but now each task carried a new rhythm, one no longer set by weariness, but by quiet momentum. It wasn't just the memory of the Christmas celebration that lingered, it was the promise that had come with it. The unspoken agreement between her and Logan to begin not something grand, but something lasting. In the weeks that followed, Logan's presence at the center became natural, not because it was expected, but because it was earned. He no longer asked where to help, he simply saw and stepped in. If chairs needed stacking, he stacked them. If a student was struggling, he knelt beside them with the patience of someone who knew how to hold space without filling it. He brought supplies when they were low, always quietly, never as a gesture but as a contribution. But his work extended beyond the four walls of the center. One rainy afternoon, as they sat in Clara's office going over grant applications, Logan leaned back in his chair, his hands laced behind his head. "You've built something remarkable," he said. "But this place could be so much more with the right support." Clara closed her laptop and gave him a cautious glance. "We've had offers before, from people who wanted to make it bigger, flashier. It always came with strings." "I'm not offering strings," he said. "I'm offering structure, partnership, expansion that doesn't dilute what you've already made sacred." She studied him. "You mean funding?" "I mean building," he clarified. "Together. What if we opened a second center, or a mobile outreach program for kids in rural communities? What if we didn't wait for them to come to us?" Clara's instinct was to recoil. Too many people had made promises like that and walked away when the work turned messy. But Logan didn't pitch his ideas with shine and charm. He spoke as someone who had been here long enough to understand the heart of the mission, and that made all the difference. They spent the next several weeks quietly mapping out a plan. Clara handled the programming, curriculum, and training protocols. Logan connected with suppliers and vendors, choosing partners based on ethics, not price. When he presented the initiative to his advisory team at Whitaker Dynamics, he made it clear that this project wouldn't be about optics, it would be personal, a legacy worth having. Some of his board members pushed back. A few suggested he keep his distance, protect his brand. He didn't flinch. "I'm not building this to impress shareholders," he said during one meeting. "I'm building it because it matters." He funded the first mobile literacy van with his own money. It wasn't sleek or branded. It was warm, inviting, and filled with books in every language spoken in the neighborhoods they served. It stopped at homeless shelters, community centers, and transitional housing programs from Vancouver's east side to the rural towns outside Victoria. And when Logan rode along during one of its first routes, he didn't bring his laptop or mention his title. He read stories, handed out snacks, and watched children climb aboard with wonder. As if the van were a magic library on wheels, Clara joined him on several routes, watching him there kneeling in the aisle, showing a girl how to write her name on the inside cover of her first book. She saw not just the man he was becoming, but the boy he must have once been, curious, quiet, hopeful. Back at the center, they launched community nights, ESL classes for new immigrants, parenting workshops, evening storytelling circles, where seniors shared folktales from their childhoods. Logan always sat in the back, listening, sometimes taking notes, sometimes just being present. He never positioned himself as a founder. He didn't need to. His presence was its own kind of offering. As their shared work deepened, so did the space between them. Not distance, but gravity. Clara noticed how often Logan looked at her, not just with admiration, but with awe. She felt it in the way he waited for her opinion before making a decision, in the way he paused mid-conversation just to listen to her laugh, in the way his presence no longer felt like something added to her life, but something intricately, naturally woven into it, and she, in turn, let him in further. She told him about her mother's silence after her father died, how she had learned to be her own compass. She told him how running the center had sometimes meant sacrificing birthdays, relationships, even sleep, but never purpose. He listened without trying to solve, without telling her to slow down, without suggesting ways to make it easier. He simply bore witness, and in doing so, he gave her something she had never known she needed. Rest that came not from stepping away, but from being held inside her own life. They celebrated milestones, not with extravagance, but with presence. When the mobile van reached its 10th location, they brought cupcakes to the children and read from a book written by a local teen author. When a student at the center published her first poem in a local paper, they framed it and hung it in the entryway. Change was no longer something that loomed at a distance. It was something they lived, one small act at a time. One evening, after a particularly long day of hosting back-to-back workshops, Clara and Logan sat alone in the center's kitchen. The lights were low. The table was cluttered with empty mugs and scraps of construction paper. Clara leaned back in her chair, her eyes half closed. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "Miss what?" "Being in charge of an empire, living in the spotlight, the big decisions, the constant movement." Logan thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said. "I used to think building something massive was what made it meaningful. But now, I think the only things that matter are the things that make you more human, the things that bring you back to yourself." She looked at him through the quiet, the fatigue in her bones softened by the certainty in his voice. "You're different now," she said. "So are you." He replied, "You let someone in." She laughed, gently. "I guess we're both learning how to expand without losing ourselves." He reached across the table and took her hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of months, of decisions made not in haste, but in steady, intentional movement. Neither of them needed to say it aloud. They had begun building something larger than any center, any van, any program. They were building a bridge, not the kind that connected cities, but the kind that connected hearts, solid, weathered, resilient. And they were walking it, side by side, into whatever came next. The winter that followed was long and relentless. Vancouver's skies rarely cleared, and a constant veil of grey pressed low over the city. Rain washed over the streets in quiet sheets, softening the edges of everything. And even the warm hum of the Jennings Literacy Center couldn't keep the weariness from settling into Clara's bones. At first, she barely noticed it. There were simply more tasks than hours. The new mobile program was gaining momentum, drawing attention from national organizations. The Literacy Center now partnered with 2 local shelters, a halfway house, and several underfunded schools. Parents came more frequently, asking for night classes, support groups, books in their native languages. Volunteers poured in, eager and untrained, and Clara took them all. On each request a promise. She didn't know how to refuse. There was always more need than she could meet. She began arriving earlier, leaving later. She skipped meals, stayed up writing proposals, and when Logan offered help, she waved him off with a tired smile and a rehearsed line. "I've got it." But beneath that smile, cracks had begun to form. She hadn't been sleeping well. She woke up before her alarm, thoughts already racing. Her patience, once her greatest strength, grew thinner by the day. Small frustrations made her chest ache in ways she couldn't explain. There were moments, brief, terrifying moments, when she would stare at her reflection and wonder if the woman looking back at her was still the one who loved this work. Logan noticed the change before she did. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was the way she'd stop mid-sentence and forget what she was saying. The way her eyes, once full of fire, now flickered like a light, fighting to stay on. He asked once if she was okay. She laughed. He didn't ask again, not because he stopped worrying, but because he knew the question wasn't the right one. Instead, he waited and watched Dotton one evening. When he arrived unannounced with takeout and found the center's lights still on at 9 p.m., he knew it was time. Clara was seated at her desk, surrounded by piles of binders and scribbled notes. She was so still he wasn't sure she'd heard him come in. "Clara," he said quietly. She looked up. Her eyes were red, her face pale. "Did you eat today?" he asked. She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. For the first time in weeks, she didn't pretend. "No," she whispered. "I forgot." He walked over and set the food down, but she didn't move to touch it. "I can't keep up," she said after a moment, her voice shaking. "I keep trying, but there's always something else. Someone else. And every time I think I've caught up, another thing slips through my hands." Logan knelt beside her chair, his hands resting gently on her knees. You don't have to do this alone, he said. I know, she whispered, but I don't know how to stop. There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of the rain against the windows. Then Logan stood, walked to the corner, and returned with a small envelope. He placed it in front of her without a word. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, no contract, no proposal, just a letter. Clara, this isn't about the center, it's about you. You've spent your life tending to others, holding the weight of their stories with grace and fire. But you've forgotten that you too are a story worth tending. I don't want to rescue you. I don't want to fix what was never broken. I just want to remind you of this. The world does not fall apart when you step back. It only breathes differently, waiting for you to return rested, restored, whole. Even when you walk away to catch your breath, I'll still be here, choosing you. Not because I need you to carry everything, but because I see you, all of you, and I am not leaving. She covered her mouth with one hand, her breath catching. No one had ever written her anything like that. Not a thank you for her service, not a fundraising speech, just something personal, human, unconditional. She looked up at him, eyes shining. I don't know what to say. You don't have to, he said, but you do have to rest. She nodded, finally, and he sat beside her as she leaned her head on his shoulder and, for the first time in months, allowed herself to be quiet. In the days that followed, she stepped back, not out of defeat but out of trust. Tessa took over the scheduling. A volunteer team organized the library. Logan hired a consultant to help structure the growth Clara had outpaced. Clara allowed herself to sleep in, to read for pleasure, to walk by the water without checking her phone. She started writing again, grants, but essays, memories, thoughts that had no agenda. And with each day, something inside her began to stitch back together. One Saturday morning, she returned to the center for a children's poetry circle. She sat in the back at first, watching as Lani stood up and read her new poem about stars and fears and growing wings. When the applause ended, Clara clapped harder than anyone. Afterward, Logan found her in the hallway. You're glowing, he said. I feel like myself again, she replied. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. That's all I ever wanted. They stood like that for a long time, to people not trying to fix or impress or solve, but simply sharing the stillness that had come from weathering a storm together. Later that evening, as they walked home under a sky finally clearing, Clara took his hand and whispered something she hadn't said aloud before. You gave me permission to rest. Logan squeezed her hand. You didn't need my permission. No, she said, eyes soft, but I needed your presence. And in that quiet, under stars reborn from weeks of rain, they continued forward, no longer chasing greatness, but growing something better, something slower, something real. The evening air in Vancouver held the first warmth of spring, brushing softly against the skin like a whispered promise. It had been 5 years since Clara had first met Logan on a snowy Christmas Eve, and now the city was blooming against cherry blossoms lining the sidewalks, the harbor gleaming in the dusk light, and the world around them humming with a quiet renewal. The Jennings Literacy Center was almost unrecognizable, not because it had changed beyond recognition, but because it had grown into something far larger than Clara had once dreamed. The building itself had expanded with 2 new wings for adult education, the other a creative art space for youth. The mobile literacy vans now traveled across British Columbia and into the rural edges of Washington state, and each spring they hosted what had become the center's most anticipated tradition, the Lantern Festival. It was an idea that had started small, just a few paper lanterns and a circle of kids writing wishes and poems onto tissue paper. Now it was a citywide event. Families, teachers, volunteers, business owners, even city officials came to celebrate literacy and light. Dozens of lanterns floated into the night each year, carrying stories, memories, and hopes into the sky. Clara stood at the edge of the park behind the center, watching as the festival unfolded like a living story around her. Children darted between booths holding lanterns shaped like animals and stars. Music drifted from a small stage where a young boy recited a poem about his mother reading to him by flashlight. Food trucks lined the sidewalks, and long picnic tables were filled with people talking, laughing, and leaning close beneath strings of golden lights. She felt Logan's hand on her back before she saw him. You always look like you're dreaming. When you stand still, he murmured beside her. I am, she said, turning toward him. but the difference is, now it's real. He offered her a paper cup of tea. She took it, her fingers brushing his with a tenderness that still surprised her sometimes. For all they had built together, there were moments like this, unguarded, where their connection felt brand new. Logan looked out at the crowd. You remember when we used to worry about getting 30 people to show up for these things? Clara laughed. And now we have 300 and not enough folding chairs. He studied her face, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the faint line of ink still smudged near her thumb from writing name tags earlier. You've created something sacred, he said. We did, she corrected him gently. No, he replied. You taught me how. I just followed your light. Before she could respond, Tessa called from across the lawn, motioning to the stage. It was time. They walked together to the platform where a makeshift podium stood beneath a string of hand-drawn banners made by the children. Clara stepped forward first, thanking the community, the volunteers, the teachers who made every day possible. Her voice was strong and calm, but when she looked down at the front row, the children who once struggled to spell their names, now holding notebooks full of their own poems, her throat caught. She stepped back, and Logan took her place. He didn't carry notes, he never did. He simply looked out at the crowd and spoke from the place he had learned to trust. Years ago, he began, I thought success was measured by scale, by how many zeros you could put behind a project, how many people you could reach. But I've learned that some of the most powerful change happens in silence, in small rooms, between people who show up again and again without applause. He glanced at Clara, then continued, this place taught me that real love isn't something that demands recognition. It's something that repeats itself in tiny, deliberate acts. In reading to a child, in listening without fixing, in staying when things get hard. And the most beautiful part, when we give like that, the return is always greater. He paused. The crowd listened, still and attentive. We hope what we've built here reminds you that community isn't an ideal, it's a practice. It's the lantern you light and carry forward, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. As he stepped down, Clara met him halfway, her eyes filled with the kind of emotion that didn't need to be spoken. Together, they walked to the center of the field, where families were beginning to light their lanterns. This part was always her favorite. One by one, lanterns were lifted into the sky, some plain, others painted in bright colors, or adorned with poems and prayers. As the first few floated upward, the crowd grew quiet, watching in reverence as light ascended into the twilight. Clara knelt beside a little girl who clutched a pink lantern with both hands. Do you want to let it go together? She asked. The girl nodded, wide-eyed. They released it together, and the lantern caught the wind gently, rising into the growing constellation above. Clara stood and turned to Logan. I never knew how much joy I was allowed to feel, she said softly. I thought choosing this work meant I had to trade away anything that felt like ease, or romance, or hope for myself. And now, he asked, now I know that building something meaningful doesn't have to cost your heart. Sometimes it's how you finally find it. Logan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Clara's breath caught. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't make a speech. He simply opened the box and let it speak for him. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a tiny inscription on the inner band that read, One story, two authors. She looked up at him, startled by the sudden rush of tears. I don't need anything big, he said. I just need you, as you are, as we are. She nodded, laughing and crying all at once. Yes, of course, yes. The crowd, noticing the moment, began to cheer. Children jumped up and down. Tessa clapped with both hands above her head. The sky above them sparkled with floating lights, each one a story carried forward. They kissed not for show, not for ceremony, but as a quiet promise between two people who had learned the value of steady love. Later that night, long after the crowds had gone and the tables had been cleared, Clara and Logan stood in the stillness of the park, hands entwined around them. A few lanterns still floated high in the distance, flickering like distant stars. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. Do you think we'll ever stop building? Logan smiled. No, but I think we'll get better at resting between foundations. She laughed, warm and light, and as the last lantern disappeared into the night, they stood beneath the wide, open sky, not finished, not flawless, but full of something rare and radiant, a shared life, a true story, and a love that carried light. In a world that often equates success with speed and status, Clara Jennings and Logan Whittaker found something profoundly different, something quietly powerful through each other. Clara, a devoted, literacy-centered director in Vancouver, had spent her life in service of others, helping children and adults reclaim their voices through the power of reading. Logan, a brilliant but emotionally distant tech CEO from Seattle, had achieved everything society applauds: wealth, innovation, influence, but found himself hollow at the core. Their worlds collided through a blind date that neither expected, on a snowy Christmas Eve that changed both their lives. What began as a simple conversation grew into something transformative, a connection rooted not in appearance or achievement, but in shared purpose and genuine presence. As their relationship deepened, Logan stepped away from his empire identity and learned how to give not just money, but time, empathy, and vulnerability. Clara, in turn, allowed herself to receive a love she had long convinced herself she didn't have time for. Together, they built more than a partnership. They built a movement, expanding Clara's literacy work into underserved communities, launching mobile learning centers, and hosting events that brought hope to hundreds. But their story wasn't without struggle. Clara burned out, trying to carry the world alone. Logan learned to wait, to hold space rather than control outcomes. Through storms and stillness, they discovered a love that was not loud, but lasting. Their journey reminds us that fulfillment doesn't come from external validation, but from building something meaningful with someone who sees your truest self. A legacy isn't always a skyscraper, might just be a single lantern, lit with intention, passed forward in kindness. Life lesson. Sometimes, the most extraordinary transformations begin with a single act of presence. In a culture obsessed with outcomes, it's the quiet, consistent love, the kind that shows up, listens, and stays, that changes everything. Whether in work, relationships, or service, choose depth over display. Now, a quick question for you. What helped Logan truly connect with Clara? A. Showing off his wealth and influence. B. Quietly volunteering and being present in her world. Comment your answer below, A or B. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe love can grow strongest in small, ordinary moments? Share your opinion in the comments so others can reflect with you. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to support the channel. Your encouragement helps us keep sharing stories that inspire the heart.